I'm Paula Child.
I'm Peter Henderson. Welcome to another live edition of Our Times. It was 20 years ago today, April 9th, 1968, that this nation buried the second of our national leaders to be assassinated in the 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King. 800 people, including politicians, civil rights workers, and members of the congregation, packed the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta for the funeral.
Across America, an estimated 120 million people watched the funeral on television. In the 5 days between the assassination of Dr. King in Memphis and the funeral in Atlanta, 110 American cities erupted in a storm of fire. Hardest hit was the seat of government, Washington, D.C., where rioting continued for 3 days, leaving 10 people dead and scars on the landscape of that city that to this day have not healed. Boston had its share of trouble, but the situation here was different. Instead of large-scale riots, burning, and looting, the outbreak of violence in Boston never erupted the way it did in other cities. This was not because of any particular governmental policy that the city had adopted, but due in large part to one particular event. Contributor Katie Abel joins us now with that story. Katie?
Paula, Boston remained pretty calm thanks in part to an event planned weeks before at the Boston Garden. That event was a very special concert by a popular black performer scheduled for April 5th, the night after Dr. King was assassinated. April 5, 1968, James Brown live at Boston Garden. The Godfather of Soul performs 24 hours after the assassination of Dr. King. Across America, cities begin to burn.
The devastating fire, looting, and rioting have left our city torn asunder.
In Boston, the situation is tense.
Wait a minute. They're all right, that's all right. It's all right, it's all right.
The country was founded on the fact of liberty, justice, freedom for all, which we never got. Economically, educational, just things that weren't right, housing, clothing, improper clothing, so many things.
Wait a minute. Can't y'all go back down and let's do the show together? We're black. Don't make us all look bad. Let me finish doing the show. Come off the stage.
The history of racial injustice and the murder of Dr. King combined to produce an inevitable rage. 20 years ago, Bertram Allain was a youth worker in Roxbury on the eve of destruction.
Well, there used to be a row of businesses here. This was part of the commercial linkage along Blue Hill Avenue. But this is also the site of most of the destruction that went on the night that Martin Luther King got killed.
Allain and members of a volunteer neighborhood security force spent the night patrolling the streets, trying to deliver a message.
Don't destroy your community, build it up. And that was the constant theme that we just said over and over and over and over again. And sometimes people listened and sometimes they didn't, because they were very, very mad. They had been robbed. They'd been robbed of, you know, their leader.
Across town, Barney Frank, then an aide to newly elected Mayor Kevin White, heard the news about the assassination and headed for City Hall.
Kevin White, ironically, was watching Gone with the Wind. He was at the theater in downtown Boston watching one of the reruns of Gone with the Wind when apparently he got a call from Commissioner McNamara and went down to City Hall from there.
I understood who King was. I understood the tragedy, but I didn't connect it to me or Boston. And then about 15 minutes later, the usher came down again and said, "Mr. Mayor, the police commissioner is in the manager's office." Then I knew there was something of serious consequence. And I went back there, and then they gave me a briefing that cities all over the country were blowing up, and the black community in Boston was beginning to react with the potential for violence.
The mayor was just 90 days into his first term. Nothing in his political experience had prepared him for the crisis he now faced.
The question was, to what degree could you balance allowing the black community to rage and vent against what has been an enormous crime, and at the same time not tear the city apart? What's the fine line you allow to the steam to come off? And you began to make decisions. For me, the first decision I made was to allow the black community to govern itself.
While community leaders attempted to do just that, White got late word of the James Brown concert scheduled at the Garden. Former Boston City Councilor Tom Atkins.
I remember Kevin's words. He and I had been in touch quite a bit during that period. He said, the last goddamn thing we need is a rock concert in the middle of Boston. He says, this whole city will go up. So his instinct was to cancel it.
Did you know who James Brown was?
No. At the time. No, I never heard of him. I was Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra was going over pretty heavy for me. Anything beyond that, in the musical world, I was a little lost. Anybody would realize. Had enormous potential consequences of damage to the blacks, to the whites, to downtown. And the question was, how did you stop it? And the first reaction is cancel the concert.
And I told him that I thought that would be disastrous. That if he thought he had problems, this was like Friday morning when I heard about this. I said, if you think you got problems, you'll have problems if the concert is held. Imagine what's going to happen when you've got several thousand kids who are not going to get the word that it was canceled, who are going to go to Boston Garden, get over to North Station and find out that this concert has been canceled. I said, you will make your fear a self-fulfilling prophecy.
With some reluctance, White agreed. WGBH-TV was asked to broadcast the concert live in hopes people would stay home to watch the show rather than riot on the streets. But a series of miscommunications resulted in the broadcast arrangements being finalized without Brown's personal approval. When Tom Atkins arrived at Logan to escort Brown to the Garden, he learned the singer could not perform on TV because of a contract he'd signed in New York.
He says, if I agree to this, he says, I'll get sued by the network.
Is he telling you all of this in the limousine?
Yeah, we're in a limousine on our way to the Garden. He's telling me that this can't happen. And, he said,
once at the Garden, James Brown learned something else that made him furious.
People have been streaming over to the Garden seeking refunds, and the normal last-minute gate had just died. And that all of a sudden, a concert that he and they had every reason to believe would be sold out was now very clearly going to be a bust.
The reason? The televising of the concert, which Brown had never agreed to. He demanded the city make up the loss. The mayor said no.
The city had a lot of problems, and we're in a lot of businesses, but we're not in the concert business. And no, I didn't know where they get $60,000. I didn't have the authority to spend city money.
While the television audience waited at home,
Introducing the young man with the word, let's meet and greet Bobby Byrd.
a high-stakes game was played out backstage at the Garden. The mayor of Boston and the godfather of soul were eyeball to eyeball. And in the end, it was Kevin White who blinked.
I horse traded with him. So I said, all right, I said to Atkins, you got to help me in the council, but I will one way or another get you $60,000. I don't know how. 2, I want you to go up on that stage. I want you to quiet down that crowd. I want you to talk to the community and tell them, you know, the last thing to do is go out in the streets. And 3, you don't have to tell them I'm a good fella. You know, I'm already elected. But I want you to convey to them that I understand this problem. And that's part of my price.
We're also fortunate tonight to have a mayor who cares about the city.
To make a long story short, he couldn't have been more effusive. He introduced me as if I was a cross between Ted Williams and Clark Gable. And in that context, he delivered.
The Honorable Mayor.
Wait a minute. First, I'd like to say I had the pleasure of meeting him, and I said to the Honorable Mayor, and he said, look, man, say, he can come down with me. He said, I'm all together. So let's say a swinging cat. Okay? Mayor Kevin White, give him a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. He's a swinging cat.
I think that's the first and last time. I've been called a lot of things, but I was never called a swinging cat again.
Was such a success that WGBH agreed to rebroadcast it immediately, an unprecedented rerun of Solid Soul on public TV. Boston was relatively calm that Friday night and all through the weekend. But the story doesn't end there. Monday morning, Tom Atkins learned that the mayor was planning to renege on his commitment to pay James Brown.
He said, look, if word gets out that you and I guaranteed $50,000 to some goddamn rock singer, he says they'll run us out of office.
I made a commitment, and I'm surprised. I thought we got it to him, but we didn't. I don't know, to tell you the truth. I know we wrestled with it. I know we brought it before the city council. I don't know. Tom Atkins or somebody would know.
I said, Kevin, you gave me your word. I gave him my word based on what you told me. And I'll be damned if you're going to back off from this. He said, I'm not going to pay it. I'm just not going to pay it.
I think out of anger, maybe. I've forgotten. I say a lot of things quickly. But I did think we went ahead and did it.
Where did Kevin White get the money to pay James Brown?
Two sources. A substantial amount of it was raised privately. And the second source of the money was he leaned on the garden to forego a substantial portion of what would have been their share of the proceeds by threatening to increase their taxes.
Well, I could have said things like that. I had a tendency to huff and puff. Whether I could have produced that, I don't know. But I think I threatened. I wasn't above that.
And Barney Frank recalls another source was also tapped for funds.
There was a group of business people, basically the Vault, and Ephron Catlin, then at the First National Bank, was acting as their kind of spokesperson. And they came up with a kitty of about $100,000 that was made available to Mayor White for programs that could not be used, you couldn't use city money for.
Out of that kitty, James Brown got his money.
But they didn't give me all the money. They only gave me $10,000.
Why didn't they give you all the money?
That's all I got.
Tom Atkins believes James Brown gave more than he got.
It is a tribute to the man and to the message.
Love, trust, integrity. Love your brother. Respect yourself.
Those of us that were out here in the field are thankful to James Brown and those in the community that had any part in planning that, because it was really a great help to us.
Oh, no one event, I think, in a historical analysis can be singled out. He made a very important contribution.
For a rare moment in history, he turned off some riots.
Mayor Kevin White teaches at Boston University. Barney Frank is a congressman from the 4th District in Massachusetts. Tom Atkins, the former counselor, is a civil rights lawyer now practicing in New York. And Bertram Mullane, the youth worker in Roxbury who tried to calm his neighbors during those tense nights following the assassination, is running a private security company in Boston. And there is, of course, an ironic footnote to this 20-year-old story. On April 5th, 1988, James Brown turned himself in to South Carolina police to face charges of assault with intent to murder his wife. He was released, Paula, on $15,000 bond.
James Brown, always making headlines.
After 20 years.
I was wondering, what kind of a relationship do these two men have now, Kevin White and James Brown?
Absolutely none at all. But it's funny, they have very, very strong memories of each other. Kevin White told me that he recalls James Brown as a snake oil salesman, to use his words. James Brown is a little kinder to Kevin White. He says of the mayor, he's still a swinging cat.
Thank you. Good behind-the-scenes look at an important event in Boston's history.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Katie. And you'll be able to see more of that 1968 concert footage of James Brown at the Boston Garden coming up later in this broadcast.
Keep telling ourselves that spring is surely here, and today nature sure teased us with a beauty, but there was a few days last week we were reminded that winter is not all that far behind us.
That's right. In many ways, April in Boston 20 years ago could have been a lot hotter. Before we leave tonight, an encore performance from the James Brown concert at Boston Garden. I'm Paula Childs.
And I'm Peter Henderson. We hope you'll join us again next week.
And for all of us at Our Times, make it a good week. Good night.
All right.